So we're doing a review now at the end of this first section of the fall term, AVOT 2001. We've talked in general about aviation, and we've discussed some different items. One of the items we've talked about is navigation. We've talked about celestial navigation, right? That's when you have a sextant and you the early navigators, this has been going on for hundreds of years. Early navigators would take the sextant and take an angle between the horizon and a planet or a star and be able to determine their latitude and longitude. That was an improvement, because before that it was all pilotage and dead reckoning, but mostly pilotage, where you see one object and you move to the next object and you move to the next object by seeing things on the ground. That, of course, didn't work very good over the ocean, because there weren't any objects. So celestial navigation was the next big navigational step of progress. And of course, even obviously ships were doing that for a long time, including Columbus, but some of the flying boats were using, and even past that, navigating across the Pacific Ocean where there's no landmarks at all. Celestial navigation was a great aid in navigating. And of course, there was dead reckoning as well, which is taking angles and knowing where the wind is, right? If you're heading to the south and the wind is coming off from from the east, you're going to have to correct a little bit toward the east in order to correct for the wind angle so that you arrive at your destination. So we talked a little bit about that as well. We also talked about airports, arriving and departing from controlled airports, even pilot-controlled airports. We talked about that as well. The procedure where you communicate. On your radio, you state who you're talking to, right? So McAllister Tower, for example. So this is who you're talking to. Or McAllister Traffic if it's an uncontrolled airport. Then you give your name, who you are, using the full syllables, not 69, 486, 486, using the phonetic alphabet to spell out your whole call sign, who you are, who you're talking to, who you are, where you are, 10 miles east, 10 miles south, whatever, what you want to do, inbound for landing, and then repeat the name of the airport that you're talking to, or the other aircraft. If you're talking to another aircraft, you repeat their name as well, right? We talked about controlled airports being on sectional charts being designated as in blue color. That their little icon is in blue. Uncontrolled airports are in magenta. We talked about airspace as well. B airspace being solid blue, C airspace solid magenta, D airspace dash blue, E airspace dashed magenta. Right, pretty simple, but needs to be memorized. We talked about Class A airspace. That's that ultra-high airspace where you have to be a commercial airline pilot to fly an ATP aircraft, certified aircraft pilot. You couldn't be a student pilot, just not for everybody. It's mostly for military and commercial airliners. We talked about runway lights, white lights surrounding an airport runway and blue lights surrounding the taxiways. We talked about controlled airspace in period, right? If we're going to come into an airport or a controlled airspace, we need permission from the controlling agency. In other words, for an airport, the control tower, but controlling agency, of course, you need to contact them as well. Other items for airports, we talked about runway numbers. How do they name runways? It's according to their compass heading. They leave the last zero off typically. So runway 27, is pointing to the magnetic west. The opposite of that runway was runway 9, the reciprocal. That's called reciprocal. Runway 9, we actually, if you're on that runway, a heading of 090. Same thing. If it's the runway 36 is pointing to the north. The opposite end of the runway pointing the other direction is south. It'd be runway 18, leaving the zero off. We talked about standard traffic patterns as well, and we understand that the standard traffic pattern, whether it's a controlled airport or uncontrolled airport, it's left-hand turns, right? So if it's going to be a non-standard pattern on the sectional chart, it'll say RP and then list the number, but that's standard. Let's see, what else? Talked about maximum airspeeds below 10,000 feet is 250 knots. We talked about deviation from air traffic controller's instructions. If it's an emergency, in response to an emergency, we're allowed to deviate, but we need to tell them what we're doing. And if they ask us, we have to make a report to them. If they ask us, upon request, of course, not voluntarily telling them what we've done wrong. Let's see, what other things? I'm just trying to think of any other items that we need to review. We talked about headwinds and tailwinds, right? If we have a tailwind, that means we have different airspeeds. We have airspeed, true airspeed, that's how fast we're moving through the air, but then we have wind currents, right? So if there's a headwind, it's going to take us, our ground speed is going to be slower, or if it's a tailwind, it'll be faster, or if it's sideways, we'll have to make some correction left or right. Let's see. We talked about minimum safe altitudes for an aircraft to operate anywhere, and see the diagram. We talked about minimum safe altitudes over non-congested or sparsely populated areas. We talked about minimum safe altitudes over congested areas, and we talked about the fact that at the very minimum, manned aircraft are supposed to stay 500 feet above ground level, whereas we can fly up to 400 feet above ground level. So there's a little bit, that's the safety feature that they put into it. Of course, manned aircraft in and out of airports are going to fly lower than 500 feet, obviously. Talked about pre-flights, doing extensive pre-flights, systematic pre-flights, not just casually glancing at the aircraft and thinking, oh, okay, it's going to fly. Talked about alcohol consumption. Remember, the legal limit is 0.04. I think maybe, we did talk about some other physiological issues as well. Hypoxia, right? That's a lack of oxygen. Hypoxia is, and we talked about pressure altitude. As we go higher, the air gets thinner. And yeah, I know drones, you're not sitting in the drone, but if you're high up on a mountain, the air is going to be thinner. The next time you go visit Denver, Colorado, go out for a jog. You'll notice you'll need to be huffing and puffing more because the air is thinner. We're used to Georgia, which is about 1,000 feet, or at least this part of Georgia, mid-Georgia. Whereas Denver is at 5,000 feet, so you're going to have a little bit thinner air. Hypoxia, that's what hypoxia is. So you need to get, if you're having trouble with that, as you get much older, you'll may need oxygen. But at any rate, if you're able, you want to get to a lower altitude where the air is thicker. We talked about hyperventilation. That's where you get excited, possibly, or nervous, or stressed out, and you start breathing too much, not enough carbon dioxide. So we need to slow our breathing or start talking. That generally tends to slow our breathing, or breathe into a paper bag. We talked about carbon monoxide, the danger of that as well. Flying your drone on a cold winter morning, and got your car on to keep it warm, and you say, oh, this exhaust pipe, this is pretty warm air coming out of the exhaust pipe, so I'm going to stand here right by the exhaust pipe. Yeah, maybe not such a good idea. Warm air, but it also contains a significant amount of carbon monoxide, and if you were to fly at a higher altitude or be at a higher altitude, susceptibility to carbon monoxide poisoning would increase. And so that gives you some idea of what might be on the test.